Hi everyone, and welcome to this week's Club Zone video. With government restrictions starting to ease from the 4th of July in England, today we're going to look at some of the frequently asked questions and some of our guidance around them. So it's important to preface our advice by saying the RYA does not seek to tell clubs what they can or cannot do, and we don't seek to enforce either ours or the government's guidance. It's up to each club to interpret what specific guidance might mean to their club and their venue, and particularly taking into account their very specific and hugely varied circumstances. So today I'm Adam, the Northwest Regional Development Officer, and today I'm pleased to be joined by Alistair Dickson, the RYA's Director of Sport Development, and Ian Walker, the RYA's Director of Racing. First of all, Alistair, what do the current guidance mean for clubs looking to run organised activities?
Yeah, hi Adam. So we know at the moment that we're allowed to gather outdoors in groups of 6 individuals from different households. So what this means for clubs wanting to run organised activities is that they can run activities for 6 individuals from different households. This is likely to be the same going forward from the 4th of July. The only difference being that legally now people can get prosecuted for being in groups of more than 30. But the way we see it for clubs is essentially, take for example a club wanting to run a junior training evening. What would probably be prudent is running a number of different activities within 6. So it might be training groups with 5 toppers and a coach, and another training group with another sort of 5 optimists and a coach, but being mindful of this 6 limit, and making sure that it looks from a bystander as though the club is facilitating groups of 6.
Thanks, Alistair.
I think Adam, I'd also add to that the new guidance that's just come out from the Department of Culture, Media and Sport is that if a venue can take more people in a COVID secure manner, then that is appropriate, even if that was more than 30 people. And the key thing, as Alistair says, is staying in your defined groups of 6. The idea isn't that you start out in one group of 6 and then you suddenly join another group of 6 and in fact everyone's kind of the same, but they're just sailing in 6s. It needs to ideally remain as defined groups. Even if the total number is really dictated by your facilities and the ability of your club to deliver it in a sort of COVID secure manner.
Perfect, thanks. With that in mind then, are clubs allowed to run racing? And if so, should it be restricted in any way?
You're starting with $1 million question, Adam. we know that many clubs have been running racing. Some have been running sort of normal club racing, some have been running very restricted racing, and some have been really quite creative in how they've created racing to minimise, for instance, both starting at the same time, finishing at the same time, shared use of the slipway, things like that. When we look at the government guidance, I think Alistair's done a good job of already explaining what that says. I think one of the hardest things for us to interpret is the meaning of the word gathering, because we're not allowed to gather in groups of more than 6. But under the exact sort of definition of the word gathering, it's not entirely clear whether a group of boats could be deemed to be a gathering, or whether that gathering only really could be deemed to be taking place when you're ashore. So, I think from what we've seen and looking forward and what we're seeing in wider society, and remember that Boris Johnson himself says the intent is to get back to normal in as many places and as fair as way as possible. We need to manage the risk. We need to think particularly about the reputational risk. What will external observers think of masses of boats on a start line or going around a mark? And we need to work out what is the appropriate number of boats could go racing. So in answer to your question, yes, for sure we can go racing. And I think the limit on the number of boats is going to be really club specific. If you absolutely want to be 100% certain, within the government guidance, with all interpretation, you would limit that race to 6 people from different households. Now, if a club feels that they're in a position to be able to take a greater number, then we have seen that done, and I think we'll see that increasingly happen as society, is released from lockdown. As we see bigger groups in pubs and hotels and restaurants, for instance, it's hard to imagine that a larger group of boats than 6 would be deemed unacceptable on the water.
So with that in mind, do you think it's feasible to run events anytime soon?
Is that one for me? Again, I'm no lawyer, Adam, as you know. I guess it depends what you call an event. My personal feeling is if it's sort of normal club type activity, then you could regard that as an activity as opposed to an event. Under the guidance, and lots of different pieces of the guidance are somewhat contradictory, but it does say that it's unlikely that you could run amateur sports events or competition at this time. And so for me right now, and when I say right now, I mean for the next period of sort of release from lockdown in July, and I'm talking specifically about England as well, I think the reality is that it's not feasible to run open meetings or, for instance, club regattas, but smaller scale, local kind of normalised activity perhaps would be possible whilst abiding by the social distancing guidelines and everything that Alistair mentioned about groupings of people. So,
Alistair, is it appropriate for people from different households to sail together in the same dinghy?
Well, currently, Adam, probably not. In fact, almost definitely not, because the social distancing guidance is 2 meters. So the majority, and pretty much all of dinghies and keel modes, it's going to be pretty difficult to sail definitely competitively whilst maintaining social distancing of 2 meters. However, as we know from the 4th of July, that's changing. And I guess what's really changing, and we've talked about a little bit, is the kind of intent of the guidance. And that was clear, especially from Boris's speech. There's lots more advice rather than sort of legality. He's looking for people to be responsible to make decisions themselves rather than following the letter of the law. But what's changed with the actual social distancing is it's still 2 meters. However, in situations where you can't social distance by 2 meters, effectively what they're implementing is the guidance around 1 meter plus, and the 1 meter, it's 1 meter social distancing plus mitigations. So for example, if you're on a bus, it might be the case of using a face covering or otherwise. So if you put that into a sailing context, then we could think, well, actually it's okay to sail a dinghy or a keel boat social distancing by 1 meter if you put appropriate mitigations in place. Now, the big mitigation that's already in place is that we're sailing outdoors. And as we know, when we look at the research, the chances of contracting coronavirus outdoors is significantly less. But, we would say if, for example, 2 people from different households were wearing face covering, they were sailing a dinghy which was single trapeze or similar, then you could say, well, actually, they're likely to be more than 1 meter apart, or at least 1 meter apart, and there are mitigations in place. And the same could be, said for keel boats, but that's not going to be the same for every dinghy and keel boat. So that's why it's really important that people think about it and just use, their own judgment, depending on the type of sailing they're doing and also the class of boat that they're sailing, just to think, actually, can we adhere to this guidance whilst sailing this particular boat in this situation?
I think also you'd probably add, Alistair, wouldn't you, that you'd look at the risk profile of the sailors. So maybe it might be more appropriate for maybe under 18s than maybe over 60s or 70s. Is that a fair judgment or not?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, I guess that's going to come, from the participants themselves. But actually, that's absolutely, the intent of the government is we're all now making decisions for ourselves if we should be, sailing and then, taking into all those factors. And the other thing that we're seeing currently is the sort of local factors. So we're starting to see outbreaks of COVID-19 on a sort of on a smaller basis, and that's going to be a big factor going forward as well. So and we can quite easily look at the coronavirus levels in certain regions and places around the UK. So that's probably another consideration people are going to have to think about and if they are in a place where there's a high coronavirus outbreak or similar, then they're probably going to likely to take less risks.
So Alistair, what responsibilities do we as clubs have to our members, staff and volunteers?
Yeah, so I mean, all clubs, and especially club management, will have responsibilities and a duty of care over, members, volunteers, staff, etc., etc. And I suppose that hasn't changed. That's always the case. But I suppose everything that's happening recently, and especially the return to voting and the challenges implementing a lot of government and advice from perhaps the RYA or elsewhere, is meaning that this is really sort of focusing the mind, and there's a lot of concern around what if somebody catches coronavirus or similar within the club. I mean, our advice really is that if a club puts together a risk assessment using government advice and also using the documents that we've put together on the Return to Voting Hub, and implements that risk assessment appropriately and communicates it, then it's discharging the majority of its responsibilities around that. Not all, but the majority. So that's really the first step, is to ensure the club's got a really good risk assessment. It's taken in, constantly monitoring government advice, and also constantly referencing our guidance documents. And if doing that, that they should be in a good position should anything happen.
Perfect. Thanks for that. And then Ian, we're on a similar theme, but with a lot of clubs are looking at the safety boat usage and stuff at the minute. So does a club actually increase their own liability or duty of care by providing rescue boat cover for an activity or event?
Well, we know that safety boat cover has been a major concern, quite rightly, of clubs, and we also know that different clubs have different policies. Some are have mandated cover, for instance, by their landlords, perhaps in the instance of a water board. And we also know that clubs have different safety boats, and some safety boats are appropriate to be maybe for single man use, and some safety boats with some safety boat crew may not be comfortable or not appropriate in that manner. So again, it's down to the clubs to specifically decide what the right policy is regarding safety boats. But we talk about increasing the liability of the duty of care. I don't think that's the case, but what the club needs to consider is that by providing that rescue boat, they do have a responsibility, and they do have a duty of care, both to the people using the safety boat and to the participants in the activity. And so it's really important that the safety boat drivers are aware of the risks of COVID-19. They could even be asked to sign a risk statement. Now, that's not a disclaimer which would absolve the club of any responsibility, but it's a document just to recognise the fact that they understand that the risks of COVID-19 that they're taking on by being a rescue boat crew. And then I think it's all about having the right equipment and the right procedures in place. So being really clear about how you would manage a man overboard or a person recovery situation. Have you got the right PPE equipment on board to manage that, and are the safety crew briefed appropriately? And just like Alistair said, the key is thinking about this ahead of time, having the risk assessment in place, having the right policies in place, and as long as all of those are based on aligned with RYA guidance, and as long as they are common sense and in line with the responsibilities with health and safety, then the club would be reasonably well covered in the event of there being any accident. But also, of course, it would go a long way, most importantly, to preventing those accidents.
Perfect. Cheers, Ian. So off the water then, Alistair. I know Ian's previously done a great walkthrough of his local club. But what from these new restrictions, what can sailing clubs open the premises yet, and the catering, bar services? What the options for clubs moving forward?
Yeah, so currently the government advice is that clubs need to remain shut apart from toilets and throughways, and there's some guidance, especially with regards to the sort of hygiene within toilets and other facilities that are similar. But going forward from 4th of July, we've obviously heard a huge amount about bars and restaurants opening, and the good news is that clubs can actually open their bars and their restaurant or catering function. But the key thing is that clubs will need to follow the government advice that's set out for those, catering and beverage providers, and that's pretty detailed and it's pretty comprehensive. And clubs will need to think really carefully. Is this going to be actually feasible in terms of implementing, but also thinking about their volunteers and the ability of their volunteers to be able to meet this guidance, and also thinking through, because it is going to need a lot of resources being bought, and thinking about the sort of layout, especially of kind of restaurants and catering, ensuring tables and other such things are sort of a good space apart. So there's a lot of considerations there that clubs will need to think through, but they should really go onto the gov.uk website and have a look at the sort of bar, catering, restaurant advice that's up there.
I think I'd add to that the I think one of the requirements, if I'm right, Alistair, is that you need to keep a record of who's attended your facility, which you must maintain for 21 days. I think that's what they're putting in place for restaurants and bars, and I think that's actually quite good practice for the club, even if they're not opening their restaurant and bar, because of track and trace, and if we do get an infection, then the need to be able to know who's been in contact with whom. I think that's an example of sort of quite good practice that clubs might want to consider, just for instance, for general sailing or other club activities.
Yeah, and it's really good advice actually. We've been looking through it for the last couple of days, and like you say, it's really transferable across facilities and activity more generally. So it's well worth having a look through, even if you're not likely to open your restaurant or bar going forward.
So thanks for that, guys. Do you have any sort of final thoughts or things you wanted to mention before we wrap up?
Yeah, I mean, maybe if I start. So I think what we've seen through all this pandemic is things are changing really quickly, and I suppose there's a kind of process that's in play now where normally Boris will make a speech, and then the actual guidance will come out on the gov.uk website. But often what we're waiting for in the background is more guidance coming from DCMS or DEFRA, which impacts us more within a boating context. So sometimes it can take us a few days to update the guidance or get the necessary information to update our guidance. So we'd really advise people to keep checking back at the guidance. We'll make sure we annotate on the front of it when it's been updated and what's been updated. But hopefully the FAQs that we've now put online are useful, that we've talked through today. But what we said at the bottom of the document is if anybody has any questions that they would like answered, we can't answer every question, but the most frequent that come through, we will then do our best to answer and then build on the FAQ document. So please, the email address is at the bottom of the document. Please just let us know, and we'll do our best as the guidance come out, and hopefully as things get clearer going forward.
Yeah, well, and I think I'd just sort of reinforce what Alistair's saying, in that it is a fast changing environment, and and attitudes amongst the public are changing fast. And of course, everybody's got their own journey through this pandemic. Everybody has their own opinions. Some people are really brutally affected by this pandemic, and some people are fortunate enough to be hardly affected at all in their own sort of smaller environment. And so we have to be respectful of that. I think, no matter how many times we pore over the words that come out of government, we're not going to find something that tells us exactly what we could do on our sailing club with enough detail to be able to say, this is 100% right and this is 100% wrong. I think, what we're urging clubs and individual sailors to do is to take personal responsibility, which of course what sailing is all about. That's what we do every time we go in a boat, is we take responsibility for our own safety. We make judgments all the time, and this is really just one more judgment. Are we operating according to the government guidance as best we can interpret it? At the very least, are we operating with the intent of that guidance? And then just a sort of another layer of safety on top, which is, are we being considerate? Are we being conservative? Are we putting anybody else at risk? And more to the point as well is, how is this going to appear to other people looking on from the outside. And I think we've had some really good work put in by clubs and their committees. I think everybody has absolutely been trying to do the right thing. But of course, we're all desperate to get on the water. And as soon as you get on the water, many of us are desperate to go racing. And hopefully we'll be able to find ways of doing that in a secure and safe manner for ourselves and for everybody else in the community.
Fantastic. Thanks for that, guys, and thanks for your time today. I think my message to everyone would just be pick up on what Ian said, and please just remember that message of being considerate and conservative as we return to boating, and just enjoy your sailing. Don't be desperate to rush and progress things too fast. Just get out there and enjoy your sailing. So no, thanks for your time today. Please, if people like this video, that'd be great. Share it with fellow members. And don't forget, if you like the content, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thanks, everyone.